Respect.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines. Russia, Ukraine and the US hold rare trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi, marking the first joint meeting since the war began. Officials say negotiations will continue today as well. Iranian official says Tehran views US military build-up in Middle East as a direct threat and would use everything at its disposal to retaliate in the face of an attack. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer calls Trump remarks about NATO troops in Afghanistan appalling, as Prince Harry says their sacrifices deserve respect. Trump accuses Canada of blocking the Golden Dome project over Greenland and warns of closer China ties. This comes as Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen calls the situation serious in Nuuk and says Denmark and Greenland will act together. Ryan Wedding, the wanted fugitive former Olympic snowboarder who turned narco smuggler, arrested by FBI after being indicted on drug charges and murder. A massive winter storm hits the US, forcing over 1,800 flight cancellations and causing power outage risks. At least 15 states declare emergencies as snow, ice, and strong winds disrupt travel from Texas to New England. Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan warns Israel is seeking an opportunity to attack Iran. He says any strike could further destabilize the region and urges all sides to pursue a different path. In her first public speech during exile in India, ousted Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina called citizens to rise against Yunus's interim regime. And viewers, let's start now with the top story. According to reports, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now set to meet U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and U.S. President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner today to discuss Phase 2 of the Gaza peace plan. Reports suggest that the U.S. delegation wants Israel to fully reopen the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza even before Hamas returns the body of one of the remaining hostages. This comes after months of indirect talks mediated by Egypt, Qatar and US and Turkey. Under the Phase 1 of the deal, Israeli forces withdrew to the so-called Yellow Line while keeping control over more than half of Gaza. Hamas has released all living hostages and most of the deceased, but one body remains in their hands. Phase 2 plans include further Israeli troop withdrawals, deployment of an international stabilization force, and the launch of Gaza governance structures, including the Gaza Board of Peace. Retired Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar joins me in this discussion. He's an international relations expert from New Delhi. Dr. Kochar, thanks very much for joining me. Firstly, there are many contentions regarding the Board of Peace itself, but let's start with the ceasefire, the Phase 2 of the ceasefire that has been agreed upon. This is going on without formalities within the Phase 1 having been completed. That is, one hostage's body is still to be returned by Hamas. What do you think are going to be some of the challenges in implementing the Phase 2, especially when there are so many contentions regarding the Board of Peace and Israel has continued its strikes?
Thank you, Kriti, because it's very important now, this progress of the Gaza peace plan. Donald Trump is very, very keen that he pushes it fast because he has been very, very fast in constituting this Board of Peace, because I think that's his first priority, and remaining aspects I think can take some time. Challenges, because as you mentioned that the first challenge is that dismantling and disarming of Hamas, because any peace initiative, if you have look, we can talk about opening of the Rafah crossing, we can talk about stabilization. And also in this, what we have seen is that there has been a frequent violation of the ceasefire also. So
Yeah.
things are not that hunky-dory between Hamas as well as the IDF. So I think the most important thing would be the constitution of the International Stabilizing Force,
Yeah.
because this force is will primarily be responsible for the disarming of Hamas, and so far there hasn't been a great consensus
Yeah.
on
Among
the
countries.
constitution of this force. So I think this should be the biggest challenge, because in case you want to have a peace, then you should not be having weapons in this area. Also, because having weapons, it leads to a clash, or the eventuality of a skirmish, or a firefight, taking place. Second, thinking from the strategic point of view, and the security outcomes, the Board of Peace, you see, unfortunately, hasn't got those type of members right now, which have a great clout in the world opinion, because a peace plan should involve the stakeholders. And who are the stakeholders here? Palestinians and the Israelis. So when you do not have any representation of the Palestinians here, and of course Hamas has not been given any place anywhere in this peace plan, so how do you enforce peace? And a second important aspect is, can we de-link Gaza from the West Bank? Because after all, Palestinians are there in both the places. So if you want to have peace in Gaza, then you also need to have peace in the West Bank. And a situation in the West Bank, as I read today, is not that conducive, because Israeli settlements are actually increasing. Recently, 19 settlements were ordered there. And what happens is that when you have settlements in these areas, you are creating a kind of a divide in the population, and you are creating an opportunity for the clashes between two communities. So, are we only looking at peace in Gaza, or are we looking at a larger picture? And the larger picture is a two-state solution. So, one of the reasons India has not joined the Board of Peace is because of the Palestinian factor. Because we have a Palestinian embassy in our country, we have a Palestinian ambassador also placed here. So, and we have good relations with Israelis as well as the Palestinians. But when we have a peace plan, we must involve both the communities. It cannot be a one-sided peace. And I think Donald Trump is trying to push this reconstruction phase, because he wants to get into the act of making a Rivera or this kind of a resort here, and he's inviting large number of players, and he's going to get money also now. More than 20 countries have pledged $1 billion. I think maybe after 3 years or so, this money will be taken, from these countries. So in case that happens, the entire Gaza Strip is going to be converted into a kind of a resort with no place for Palestinians, because this is what I actually visualize, because there cannot be any place for Palestinians once you start doing this kind of a reconstruction. Either you make their homes, you make their hospitals, you make their schools, and the infrastructure, the drainage system, the water supply, the power supply. Unless you do all these activities, because so far the blueprint has not been spelled out. So I think maybe a bit premature for me to say all this, but once a blueprint is established, or it is known to us, I think we'll be able to comment better on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your comprehensive response, Dr. Kocher. Do stay on with us as we proceed now. Viewers, let's also tell you that the updated US National Defense Strategy warns that Iran may attempt to acquire nuclear weapons but asserts that Washington will not allow it. The document reiterates US President Donald Trump's stance that Iran will be prevented from obtaining nuclear capabilities. It also notes that Iran's leadership has left open the possibility of pursuing nuclear weapons, particularly by avoiding meaningful negotiations. In response, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi expressed his country's willingness to engage in talks with the US on an equal footing. Despite these calls for dialogue, the US remains firm in its position to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. The issue continues to be a central point of tension in US-Iran relations. Retired Major General Dr. Kocher requested to join me back in the discussion here. Dr. Kocher, would you say that US is really going to now blow up Iran as Trump has threatened? And if that happens, Iran has not stopped short of saying it will retaliate with full force.
Kriti, see, this national security strategy, if you read it carefully, one thing is evident, that a military solution to this problem will be the last resort. And what this national security strategy aims is a deterrence by denial. That means that you create a conditions, economic conditions, and you make that country so weak, and the people rebel against that country, which we have seen it already happening. And then you move all your forces all around the country, and you surround it, and you make an economic blockade of that kind. I think that is the strategy of the moment, because any military action, I don't think is going to yield much dividends to the United States, because they have tried it in the 12-day war, and apart from destruction of a few nuclear sites, I don't think much damage to the fissile material has been done. And today also Iran is in a position to make a nuclear bomb. So point here is, and it is very, very critical for all to understand, that US will not allow Iran to make a nuclear weapon. So where do we go next from here? Because the next course of action is, Israel is vulnerable in case Iran makes a nuclear weapon. The other neighboring Muslim countries are also vulnerable, because Saudi Arabia, Qatar and UAE also don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So I think the bottom line is here is that in case Iran wants to put an end to all this posturing which we are seeing of the United States, and also to ensure stability within their own country, they must open out for talks. And this rigid stand of Khamenei and his entire leadership has to change, because there is a massive unhappiness among the people due to the hardships, economic hardships, and the sanctions which are taking place, and these sanctions are going to increase by the day. So I think Iran needs to smell the coffee now and try to make some kind of overtures with the US administration to have a mediator possibly coming in, somebody like Qatar or some other country, to mediate a talk between the Iranians and the Americans, because this is the only way this impasse, what is actually happening in this area, can be stopped.
Okay. Dr. Kocher, also note the fact that Iran has already enriched uranium, the 400 kilogram uranium, up to 60%. How long can it really take to take that 60% to 90% and use it for weapons?
See, once you have the capability of enrichment, and you have the raw material available to you, it's a matter of weeks only. It will not take much of a time, because if your intention is to make a bomb, when I was speaking to a DRDO scientist, he was telling me that a low yield nuclear weapon with from 60% to 90%, you can make 4 to 5 of them in a matter of months. So if that is the case, possibilities, because a nuclear atom bomb or something like that, even one or two are enough to cause devastation of the types we have seen in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So therefore, I would, in the interest of the world peace, in the interest of the entire world community, in terms of humanity and all those things, we need to ensure that Iran does away with its nuclear program. At the same time, there has to be assurance from Israel also that Israel will also not pursue its nuclear program. You see, what I am given to understand is that Israel is also trying to make a nuclear or an atom bomb.
Yeah.
So in case there is a disparity, or if Iran feels that Israel can make it, and if I can't make it, so I don't think that will happen. Both the countries have to come to an agreement and give an assurance that neither of them will make the nuclear bomb.
All right, sure. Dr. Kocher, thanks very much then for joining me in this discussion with your perspective. And now moving ahead, viewers, negotiators from Russia, Ukraine and the US are meeting in Abu Dhabi for a second day of discussions aimed at finding a solution and ending the nearly 4-year-long war in Ukraine. The talks that are driven by a proposal from US President Donald Trump mark the first direct contact between Ukrainian and Russian officials on the plan. The peace proposal initially met with criticism in Kyiv and Europe for aligning too closely with Moscow's interests, has been now revised to include ideas such as European peacekeepers, though these have been rejected by Russia. A key point of contention remains the fate of the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine, where both sides have entrenched positions. As the negotiations continue in Abu Dhabi, Russian missile strikes on Kyiv have caused significant damage. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko confirmed multiple explosions with several non-residential buildings hit as temperatures dropped below the freezing point. The attacks have left thousands without heating, and the European Union has accused Russia of deliberately depriving civilians of warmth. Overnight, further Russian strikes in Kyiv and Kharkiv killed 1 person and injured 22 others. All right, viewers, those are the latest details that are coming in as of now. In fact, let's provide you some more information that's coming in as far as the peace dialogue between Russia and Ukraine is concerned. Kharkiv and Kyiv have come under attack amid Russia-Ukraine peace talks in Abu Dhabi, and Russian air attacks have targeted Ukraine's capital Kyiv and the northeastern city of Kharkiv. And in this, 1 person has been killed and at least 20 injured as per the local authorities in Ukraine. The violence is coming as negotiators from Russia, Ukraine, US will be meeting in Abu Dhabi for the second day of negotiations today on a Trump-backed peace plan. In fact, this is the first known direct contact between Ukraine and Russian officials on the proposal since the talks have begun. Ukraine's chief negotiator Rustam Umarov has said that the discussions focused on the parameters for ending Russia's war and the further logic of the negotiations process. In fact, a child was among the 14 wounded in the Russian aerial attack on Ukraine's Kharkiv. And I'm now joined in by Ambassador Veena Sikri, who's former High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh, and she joins us from New Delhi. Ambassador, thanks very much for joining us. Firstly, these are the first trilateral talks and the first talks where Ukraine and Russia will be sitting together to discuss peace. Of course, Donbas remains a crucial point. Security guarantees for Ukraine is also now contentious because Trump has made huge claims, tall claims even earlier, but never really delivered on it, or he hasn't even signed any paper to fix those guarantees. And even as these 3 countries are sitting for talks, shellings and strikes continue. So how do you see this coming to a conclusion?
I think it's very tough right now because, as you quite rightly said about the territorial question, the Russians are insisting that the 20% of the Donbas region that is still with Ukraine, where the Ukraine military is still there, they don't control all of it, but the Ukraine military is still there. They want the Ukraine forces to leave, which of course Zelensky is not agreeing to. And in return, of course, the question of security guarantees for Ukraine are also a problem because Russia from the very beginning has been very clear that Ukraine should have nothing to do with NATO. I think ultimately the Europeans who have been right now supporting President Zelensky very strongly has to come in and put their weight behind Zelensky in favor of a solution. Because right now, we've seen even occasions where President Zelensky and President Trump have had meetings and come out with, yes, now we're going to have a conclusion kind of thing, we're going to get a deal. But then again, when the Europeans weigh in, it all Zelensky then hardens his position. The first time the trilateral talks have taken place with the US presence is important, but I think the real talks are between President Putin and Steve Witkoff, who is the American President Special Envoy, and Jared Kushner, American President son-in-law. These are the real talks that are going on because in the talks in Abu Dhabi from the Russian side, they're just the generals are there. The political leadership is not there at all, or the representative. So I think this is a very complex situation right now, but I think that there is the possibility of getting close. There's every possibility. Because every time when President Trump met President Putin in Alaska, it looked very close. Subsequently, when President Trump met President Zelensky, it looked, okay, now we'll get somewhere. But each time when the actual nitty-gritty comes, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, when that comes, it comes to that, then there is a pullback. And we know that the Russian shelling is continuing even in Odessa, in the Kherson region. So, I think this has got to end, because if you look back on it, way back within weeks of this conflict starting, there were talks in Istanbul between between President Putin's representatives and President Zelensky's representatives, and they were very close to an agreement. At that time, Russia did not have even 20% of the Donbas region in its control. But then the Europeans came in, the UK came in, Boris Johnson flew there and stopped the agreement. No, we're going to get it in another way. And since then, the position has completely reversed. Now, Russia has 80% of Donbas, and Ukrainian troops are there in the remaining 20%. In some part remaining. So it's a complete standoff, but it should come to a conclusion because President Zelensky's got to recognize the writing on the wall.
And Russia is still stuck on the Anchorage formula, which is to have Ukraine cede territory to Russia.
Sorry, yeah, but it's true because President Zelensky is talking in terms of some kind of a special economic zone, anything except yielding that territory. Any other form. But President Putin is not going to accept that because A, he has got military control, number one. B, the people of those regions, the Donbas regions, have voted in the referendum in the areas under Russia's control. And in the Russian constitutional mechanism, they've already included these areas as part of Russia. So I think, looking back on old losses may be of no use today, but that is important as a reference point. We should be able to come to an agreement today, considering that at that time when everything was in President Zelensky's hand, he did not do it. Now he shouldn't miss another opportunity. It will be even worse later. So I think that barring actual American troops on the ground, or barring direct European participation, which I think is completely unacceptable, there will be then the real Third World War. It's already been talked about that we are in some kind of a Third World War already. But I think that we have to push ahead with these trilaterals because it's the first time. One round may not yield anything. You have to have several rounds. And at the same time, I think the European Union and all those countries have to come around and agree that the time has come for a deal. In fact, the European Union is now talking of, reinitiating their respective dialogues with Russia. All this time, there was a great animosity between the European Union countries and Russia. And this was actually a bit unnatural because they're both part of the same European continent, even though Russia is a Eurasian country. But basically, the Russian part of, other than Siberia, it's very European. But because of the conflict, the dialogue between Russia and the Europeans, the Germans, the French, the UK, and others had completely broken down. I think this revives in some way or form. There's talk of that now, considering that the European Union American dialogue has broken down over Greenland. I think that if this pan-European dialogue starts and they start talking, restart talking about security in Europe and the earlier dialogue that used to be there on the OSCE dialogue, and they need to revive all these things so that they understand that Europe is one home and they have to bring peace in that home. Otherwise, it will be disastrous for them and for the world.
Ambassador, do stay on with us. We have another discussion to do. Viewers, moving on now. Former Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who was ousted, has called on the people of Bangladesh to overthrow the interim government led by Mohammed Yunus, claiming it cannot guarantee free and fair election. In her first public address to a gathering in India, Hasina accused Yunus of being a corrupt, power-hungry traitor who had a role in a conspiracy to remove her government. She's urged the nation to rise against this government, grounding her appeal in the spirit of the country's liberation war. The remarks came just weeks before Bangladesh's general election on February 12, which is expected to see the Bangladesh Nationalist Party emerge as the largest one. Hasina also demanded an ironclad guarantee for the safety of religious minorities, women and vulnerable groups, while calling for the United Nations to conduct a truly impartial investigation into the events following her government's fall. I invite Ambassador Sikri to join me back in the discussion here. Ambassador, now of course this is the first public address that Hasina has given while still in exile in India, and in that she has attacked Mohammed Yunus and clearly gone on to blame him for her ouster and the students' uprising that we saw. But contentious here, and crucially here to note that her address is now coming when Bangladesh has entered the period of campaign and Nasha Awami League is not allowed to contest the polls.
I think that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's address is a very important and significant one. I'll tell you why. Because during that address, she was of course online. She did not appear physically, but she gave this very impassioned plea online, a very strong address, her strongest ever. And she's called for a complete boycott of the polls by the Awami Leaguers. Now, I think that this is a very important moment for Mohammed Yunus and his interim regime to introspect. Because we know that this was a regime change operation. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was not ousted in any spontaneous student uprising. It was not spontaneous, and there were no students either. These were all members of the Jamaat-e-Islami and its youth wing, the Islami Chhatra Shibir. This is a very well-planned, meticulous operation, and we know that there were, Pakistan was the conduit, Jamaat-e-Islami was the person on the institution on the ground in Bangladesh, and behind Pakistan were a number of Western powers. Now, for these Western powers to now turn a blind eye to what Mohammed Yunus had been doing for the last 18 months, I think this is sheer hypocrisy. Because no, there has been no human rights. The attacks, Sheikh Hasina is absolutely right, the attacks on the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Christians, the Sufis, the Ahmadiyyas, and the women. I mean, it is incredible, the kind of, the rape against women. No woman is safe on the streets of Dhaka. And the economy has gone into a tailspin. Nobody has a job. Hundreds and thousands of factories have closed down. Imports, they're not able to arrange even the cotton yarn import to get their factories going because Mohammed Yunus has disrupted the trade between India and Bangladesh. He's changed all the, and it's a complete disruption. So I think that Mohammed Yunus is certainly not acting in the interest of the people of Bangladesh. He's only acting in the interest of the Jamaat-e-Islami and the people who are behind the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is Pakistan and the Western powers. Pakistan is trying to re-embed itself in Bangladesh to the pre-1971 days, and this is a great security threat for India as well.
Right.
And the Western powers are completely done. They're coming around saying that, oh, Yunus is doing so well, everything is well in Bangladesh. They know it's not well. They know that by any minimal standards of life and living in a country, the kind of, rapes, lynchings, killings, burnings, destroying of property that has happened in Bangladesh in the last 18 months is worse even than the 71 Liberation War. But they're still putting a smile on their faces and saying, oh, we want to go ahead with the elections. But Awami League is only calling for inclusive elections. I think government of India themselves have been saying repeatedly that the elections should be inclusive.
Yeah.
So I think the minimum that anybody can do to accept that the election should be inclusive and Awami League should be allowed to participate. The second point I'd like to make is that about the so-called referendum. This is another, shall I say, fraud being perpetrated on the world by Mohammed Yunus and his cohorts in the interim regime. And this referendum is a completely unconstitutional, illegal document. It's been put together by a handful of people, many of them from the West, professors and so on, and they want a complete change in the constitution of Bangladesh. They want to remove the term secular, any such thing. They want really to lay the grounds for a presidential form of government where Mohammed Yunus will be the president, and non-secular Awami Jamaat-e-Islami run government. Now, they try to present this to the people of Bangladesh in a referendum which has about 86 questions to which you have to answer one single yes or no, and nobody has seen the July Charter. It's not been circulated. So I think that this is a complete fraud being perpetrated on the people of Bangladesh. This referendum should not be allowed to take place because it is not within any constitutional imagination. It's a fake document just drawn up by a few people and trying to be foisted on the people of Bangladesh. So this too should be stopped. So I think this is something again that the Western powers who are turning a blind eye to it must wake up and smell the coffee, but they are not. And this is the main thing, because otherwise in every other part of the world, including in India, you talk about, oh my God, that's human rights. This is human rights. That's suppression. That's oppression. All kinds of fake allegations are made. But in Bangladesh, where it is actually happening under their watch, because you know that the American ambassador and the British ambassador, the two British High Commissioner, are the two most important people running the show over there.
Yeah.
So absolutely incredible and unbelievable how this should be happening in Bangladesh. The world should get together, stop the elections, stop the referendum, get a caretaker government which is in keeping with the constitution, and hold the elections under the caretaker government with the inclusion of all political parties registered with the Election Commission.
Right, Ambassador, we'd have needed more time for a deeper discussion on this, but thanks very much for your comments for now. And viewers, that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World.